My name is Hailey, and on behalf of Bethany, Julio, and myself, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's virtual concert featuring works of Ravel, Peter Lieberson, and, of course, our good friend, Julio Friedmann. For the final piece on this concert, Bethany and I will present the premiere of Julio's Fried Cycle. We'll follow that presentation with a chat with the artists, in which you can get to know a little bit more about me and Bethany, Julio, and the inspiration for his songs, and the process that we underwent in putting them together and putting this entire concert together for you to watch. We thank you so much for joining us, and we ask that if you're interested in sending a tip our way, which will be shared between the artists, you search my name, that's Hailey McAvoy, on Venmo, or look for me on PayPal. And if you want to send a tip our way, we'd be so grateful. But of course, what we're most grateful for is your presence. So thank you so much for being here and listening, and we hope that you enjoy the concert and share it with anyone else that you think might like it too. With that said, enjoy, and we'll catch you after the performance.
Right. Hello there. I would be remiss if I didn't start my comments with gratitude to Hailey and Bethany. These songs were written nearly 30 years ago and would remain on ice if it weren't for their inspiring and extraordinary musicianship. Their interpretation has redefined my music to me, and the songs have gone straight into my brain from whence they came. I had the good fortune to study music composition at MIT of all places, which was blessed and still is with extraordinary composition faculty. John Harbison taught me 20th century music and composition. He had an affection for songs as well as for an extraordinary poet, the art critic Michael Fried. Fried's short, vibrant poems are simultaneously static and dynamic, fixed frames of fluid time. Each poem can be ingested in one take, as self-contained and beautiful as an egg. Harbison had hung a set of individual poems on the classroom door for compositional assignments. I picked one up, the Black Snagg, and was hooked. In each poem, specific words in the text suggested melody, rhythm, tempo, and color that anchored each song. This set comes from his 1973 anthology, Powers. I hope you enjoy each poem's coiled energy and bell-like clarity as much as I do. The texts are on the website for this performance. I look forward to discussing them all later, but wish to discuss two up front. Depths, the third song's poem, has special relevance now. It was written during the Vietnam era and evokes apocalyptic decline of America's people and stature through poor leadership. I scored this song during the Reagan era, and the threat of nuclear annihilation that haunted my youth resonated in Fried's text, as did Operation Desert Storm when I wrote it. It seems our nation regularly visits crisis of leadership and standing. The song and poem resonated for us all in the wake of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. America, like a hounded shark, not knowing where to turn, makes for the depths, taking us down. The fifth and final song, Thaw, is meant to be a palliative, a tonic to the difficult voyage of the cycle. It is the most tonal and melodic of the set. The phrase, ice melts in the warm cold, is like a set of mirrors reflecting each other infinitely, opposites orbiting around each other. The song, like spring, is meant to signal renewal, release, and repose. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the conversation portion of this evening's program. My name is Hailey, and you've just been hearing me sing for the past 40 minutes or so.
And my name is Bethany, and indeed, you've been hearing me play.
And we are joined tonight by Julio.
It is such a treat to be here. Thank you. I'm the only Julio Friedmann you'll ever meet, and delighted to be part of this event.
Thank you so much. We're so glad to have the chance to sit down and chat with you, particularly after having worked on your Fried cycle and shared it with our audience tonight. So I thought to kick off our conversation, I'd just ask you a little bit about how these songs came to be. I'd love to know a little bit about, what drew you to the poetry. I remember you mentioned in your note that they were part of an assignment that John Harbison gave at MIT. And I would just love to know more about, what drew you maybe to the first poem that you said and then to the other ones and how the song sort of evolved.
Sure. So I had the good fortune of studying at MIT, which is an incredibly, it's almost bizarrely dense with really high quality composers. And John is one of them. Peter Child was also an instructor and a mentor to me. And these guys just loved songs. And so they would think about songs and write songs and oratorio. And for them, vocal art was important. And it sort of imbued everything we looked at that with that sensibility. And so, as I'd said, I was one day just walking down the corridor, and for a completely different class, John Harbison had assigned these poems as assignments. And I picked out one and I immediately was like, oh my God, this is an awesome poem. And I just couldn't resist. I stole it and walked away and started writing a song. And John was perplexed because he was like, one of the songs is missing. Like none of my students took it. What's going on? So, but I just came to love Michael Fried's poems as a consequence. And one of the things that composers do with text is they sometimes sort of do the Mickey Mousing sort of thing, So when you say we are rising, then the song, the timbre goes up and it goes higher in register and so forth. Other point, people will be like, they'll say the word quiet and everybody will go piano. It's like that sort of Mickey Mousing kind of stuff. It got a bad rep for a while, but I mean, Bach did it, Brahms did it, like all these great composers. That was the way they did it. And so Fried's poems did that for me. So, for example, The Flash of Lightning is a good example. That sort of repeated pair of octaves, bling, bling. For me, that was the flash. And of course, towards the end of the poem were the dark stairs rising. It's like climbing the dark stairwell. And so, of course, the voice is rising, the pitches are rising as part of that climbing. And there was a lot of that sort of I got out of his poems. They just struck me immediately where I was like, I know how I want to represent this in music.
Awesome. Yeah, and I would say that a lot of that really became clear for us. Like, it's really one of the things that's most enjoyable about, for me, putting together new music is like, you can't cue it up on Spotify. You can't cue it up on Spotify and listen to how, Anna Sophie von Otter did it and how Janet Baker did it. You can't do that. And so it's really about taking the music and seeing it on the page. I mean, also, with my experience having engraved these for you, I, took the handwritten scores and typed out all the music. And so I got to know it that way in a very close way. But even that, that's like such a zoomed in look at the music. And even that is so different from when, we first start putting it together and really being able to hear like, wow, okay, that's what it looks like. And then here's this world. And especially, when it's new and we've never heard it before, it takes a while for that to come into focus and for us to sort of find it together. But it was really, really fun, looking for that and finding it in your settings of these poems and sort of asking ourselves, okay, what was he thinking? Like, what do we think that he was going for? And how can we read his mind and like bring it in to what we're doing? And then to get to coach with you and say like, okay, here's what we think you're thinking, so.
Yeah, and then to compare to what, sometimes we got it right, and then sometimes you really were able to give us a key that we were missing into understanding a phrase or,
Well, again, it was marvelous that you were so open to it and so sensitive to the interpretation from the beginning. So two quick provisos, I guess. One of them is something you may not have known about me. For 4 years while I was in college, I was also in a Shakespeare troupe. And so I got really into text, like text was my thing. And so when I approached these songs and when I began composing songs, for me, it was always about text, you know, first and foremost. And I don't think the 20th century tradition has always done that. Let's put it that way. But that was really essential to me. And so I wanted the words to pop and to crack. The other thing, and this is going to sound aggrandizing, I hope it doesn't come off this way. One of the things that I like about the science I do, about geoscience, is you have to do zoom in and pull out constantly. You have to look at grains of sand and you have to look at mountain ranges and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And so the things that were nice about the Fried songs is they were such an entirety of themselves, you could do that. You could zero in on a consonant or you could zero in on a sound in a word. And at the same time, you get this sort of snapshot of the whole thing. And so as a composer, I tried to do that same thing where I tried to tie the bundles of it, bits of it together in a way that was sort of holistic and gratifying. And the fact that you found it that way was so rewarding for me. You just have no idea.
Thanks, Julio. You know, this brings me to something that I wonder about. Now, I don't know. I mean, you were in college when you wrote these songs, mm-hmm. right?
Yes.
But I would be really interested to know, like, if you have found ways that your work in, you know, climate science mm-hmm. has influenced your understanding of music, or like any other composition that you've done since then, or even at that time, you know, while you were studying, sort of other ways that those fields overlapped. I mean, I do a lot of work in the humanities, and Bethany does a lot of work in math, and we spend, you know, considerable time thinking about how our work in the different disciplines overlaps and like enriches our music making. And I'd love to know where you are on that.
So 3 discrete answers to that. One of them is, I think there's actually an aspect of discipline that that supports these different pathways in life. That this whole idea of like, you know, music and math to go together, like I've never believed that. I've seen too many mathematicians who cannot sing or dance. I know too many musicians who cannot add or subtract. Like it doesn't really go together. But there is something I think about the discipline that people who can solve equations for 4 hours in a row can do scales for 4 hours in a row. And so there's something about sort of a sympathetic sensibility between these that makes sense. There's a second thing there's a general comment that I really believe that these sort of humanities and music and science, there's an aspect of it that goes back to sort of Longfellow's poem, I guess, or was it Wordsworth? Can't remember who. But beauty is truth, truth is beauty. Mm. That scientists seek an aspect of truth and beauty in the natural world, and artists do as well. And I found that sensibility worked for me very well as a college student, and I was able to carry those in parallel to some extent. And so when I stopped chasing music professionally and started chasing science professionally, those sensibilities still work together. I will hear pieces of music performed and they will fire off both aspects of my musical sensibility as well as my technical or my science work. And often when I have a hard problem and I can't figure it out, I'll sit at the piano and I'll play. And that's what Einstein called non-time, that he would have non-time in order to relax his brain enough to get insight. Yeah. And playing music still gives that for me. I will say, though, that composing is kind of a different thing. Composing takes an analytical, structural part of your brain. And when I was actually working in industry, interpreting 3D seismic data, it crushed my composing skills. Like I just couldn't, it would exhaust that part of my brain. It is not the case now. Now I'm reading and writing. It's a different set of sensibilities. And so it's still, I find that I am able to actually still tag that compositional sensibility in my brain now because it's not being exercised as much. The last thing I'll say is that music and art and sound communicate in a way that's very different than sort of the linear rational mind. And one of the challenges that I face as a scientist and as a communicator in science is how do you get people to understand stuff when they don't read graphs, you know? And often you have to go to something else. You're going to metaphor, you're going to image, you're going to sound. You're trying to communicate something in a way that is not analytical, but is instead personal and connects and just with a different sensibility into people's heads. And so in that context, I feel very grateful that I've been able to explore both of these worlds to some extent because they nourish each other in very real ways.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious now again, you mentioned that in your work now that's not so heavily analytical, you feel like you have a little more musical brain space. Are you currently working on any new compositions?
So I gotta say the short answer is not quite, but it has been coming back to me. And doing this project has made me very excited to write again. Because as I said to you before, there is a truly unique, unparalleled, distinct sense when you write music and hear it played back to you. There is just nothing else in the world like that. It is a completely distinct sense. And having received that in such strong dose over the past couple of months, I'm like, oh, I need me more of that. Like, I got to get more of that in my life. And so, among other things, there's sort of two bits out there. One of them is a completely different project that Lara and I helped commission with the Palo Alto Symphony. Was a violoncello duo. And they did a wonderful piece called Volt recently, and we'll put the link in the chat function here later. And that immediately reminded me of a solo cello piece that I wanted to write years ago. And all of that music came sort of rattling back into my head. And I realized actually it's not good for solo cello. I need more range. Actually, a cello violin duo is actually a much better casting for that musical concept. And so that's starting to rattle around my head. And the other thing is these songs that you guys have performed so brilliantly have led me back to a song that I wrote, which is a setting of E.E. Cummings poems. And I set two poems, and it's caused me to go back into his poetry, actually. And it's the same sort of thing. There's a specific poem that he wrote about a friend of his, Little Joe Gould. And Little Joe Gould was a brilliant academician at Harvard who went crazy and became homeless. And they maintained a friendship throughout his life. And he wrote a poem called Little Joe Gould, and I actually set that poem. But he wrote several poems around it, actually. And there's one that he wrote called A Man Who Had Fallen Among Thieves. And it was another description of Little Joe Gould at one of his worst. And the poem ends with this phrase. So the last couplet says, and staggered, banged with terror through a million, billion, trillion stars. It's such a strong sound, such a strong sensibility. And in a very real sense, the million, billion, trillion stars were the lights of the city in which he lived. But at the same time, this acknowledgement of universe and the humanity at the core of what he was doing at that moment. And so I'm like, yeah, I probably need to write that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so amazing. I mean, one of my favorite things about singing, kind of the reason that I got into singing at all, actually, was because of poetry. Like when I was a kid, I loved song lyrics, like more than anything. I would memorize them just in droves and droves and droves and print them out and underline the parts of them that I loved the most. And if I didn't understand them, sometimes I would take them to school and like ask my music teacher, oh, what do you think the lyrics to this pop song really mean? Because I don't really get it. And then, I finally, when I started taking voice lessons, when I first sang a song in German, actually, my teacher said, okay, now go home and this is how you can find the translation of this song. And I went and looked it up, and she had told me, like, be careful because you may find a translation that's kind of paraphrased because the intent is that you would sing those words instead of the German words. And so, if it rhymes or if it sounds, kind of sing-songy, then that's probably not literal. So I was like on guard, like, okay, I'm looking for like the literal meaning of this German poetry. And I went home and I was looking for it, and I was convinced that I couldn't find it. And I printed out the thing that I thought was best, and I brought it to my lesson and said, I tried to find the literal translation, but I just don't think I got it, because this poem is too beautiful. I mean, the words, these can't be the words. And my teacher looked at it and read it, and she was like, no, those are the words. Those are the lyrics. And it's just, it's this huge gift that we get, that it's like, it's not only the music, it's also the poetry. And I think that's something that, we were just before this call, we were talking about like, man, how did we come up with this program? Because this program is Ravel, Trois, poèmes de Stéphane Mallarmé, followed by 2 songs by Peter Lieberson, selections from the Neruda songs, and then the Fried songs. And we were just sort of going back in our minds to, man, how did we wind up settling on this program? And even in just talking to you now, there are some similarities in the poetry that I hadn't really thought about until you've been talking, like with the Fried poems, sort of the way that they zoom in on little aspects in nature, and they simultaneously have this zoom in and zoom out. I think that's a really big feature actually in both the Ravel and the Lieberson. Like in the Ravel, the first song being all about like, my soul is climbing toward you, and your, like, the tawny freckles on your brow and the errant sky of your angelic eye. And it's like these huge images of the sky and the leaves and the sun on the water in October, but also all contained in a person, and then all contained in this song. And it's been really challenging for me, actually. The poetry, like the images, are so huge that it almost feels difficult to convey them, and we've really been working a lot on like getting lost in them, and getting lost in ways that aren't even like the literal meaning of the text, but even just like the images that they evoke. And I think that's something that we also worked on a lot with your songs, finding the images that the poetry evokes and the images that the music evokes.
But not in an analytical way also. I mean, there's maybe a moment where you step back and analyze the poetry maybe, but really what it comes down to is letting it sort of indwell you, letting these images sort of like make their way into your mind and then do stuff there, bring that back to the music. And your songs really demand that and really enable that as well, just like these other 2 sets have for us.
Well, it's incredibly generous of you to say that, but I'll tell you, the proof is in the performances. And in particular, Bethany, you have such a strong sensibility of the phrasing, of the quality of sound. I mean, you really work that, and you can hear it. And it comes out of, again, the fact that as artists, we have the rare privilege to really, spend our neurons doing that, and, we're paid accordingly in most contexts. But I mean, it ends up becoming this very nonlinear, very intuitive kind of thing that is around sonority and sense.
Yeah.
And the fact that you sort of found so much that was in there, and found a whole bunch of stuff that I had never planned, that I think you discovered, is again extremely gratifying. And it highlights and underscores the fact that you have so thoroughly inhabited these songs and brought your sensibilities to them.
It was a privilege to be able to do so.
Especially right now. It's it's like the biggest gift to be making music for someone other than ourselves. I mean, it's a huge gift that we are, that we are together, and that we can rehearse and collaborate, in real time, which is so much more than so many other singers and pianists have in this moment. But especially, to make recordings, it's been so challenging for me this year, making so many recordings for auditions, and just sort of making them and really pouring a lot into them and sending them off, and it almost feels like they go out into the void. Like, I know that people are listening, and I know that hopefully people care, but it's really, really special to be able to tap into all of this that's required to bring music to life for the sake of giving it back to the composer. I mean, that's so meaningful. It's really been a super special project for us to work on during this time.
We certainly don't get to do that with most of the music that we
Yeah.
work on, you know, except maybe in some metaphysical sense.
Yeah, Ravel's not composing anymore. He's decomposing.
Yeah,
So,
he definitely doesn't get to, you know.
There's a prominent pianist in our field who always, one of his lines that he always says is, "Oh yeah, last night I had a seance with Ravel, and he told me that what he meant by this marking was, you know, blah, 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 blah." And it's always, you know, quite funny when he says that line, but it's also a real gift when we don't need a seance to be able to ask the composer what he meant by something in particular.
Well, and one of the things I think that is true today in a way that most people don't understand is how many really, really good composers of song there are out there. It's a buyer's market, man. There is so much good song out there, and we're spoiled for choice. And what I've found exciting is so many composers are sort of instinctively going to leader. They're going to this archaic, weird form of singers and pianos standing together, you know, but there's something so eternal. It's eternal and it's rich, and it is contained. It's evocative, and there are workshops, there are networks, and the modern world has actually enabled this sort of eruption of high quality art song that is in real time being written. If anything, if I have one wish from this evening, it's actually that a couple of people out there listening will dive into what's out there today and experience a little more of it, because there's so much good stuff.
That is totally true. We should like curate a playlist or something with this as a jumping off point, and then just, you know, the tip of the iceberg for some of the other things that are out there, because it's true. There's so much good stuff going on.
It's true. And unfortunately, not nearly enough good singers and pianists to match. So thank you again for taking an interest in my songs and assembling such a beautiful program.
It is our pleasure, Julio. And we really thank you for the opportunity. It has been a real gift. And I guess it feels like a good time to ask you if you have any closing thoughts to draw our discussion to an end before we part for the evening.
Before the closing thoughts, an apology, actually. So I need to apology for Bethany. I really fancied myself like a decent pianist when I wrote these things, and I just wasn't. So I wrote all kinds of stuff that was not really pianistic and kind of tricky. And for me, I was like, I'm Schumann. I'm going to write all these interlacing lines and stuff like that. And it's good composition, but it ain't exactly piano music. So in that context,
necessary. We all like a challenge. Absolutely, it was worth every minute.
That was extremely generous of you just now. Thank you.
And I feel like I should also jump in and say, I remember saying to Bethany, you know, when we were recording, we had a relatively long recording session, but my voice was not taxed. I was like, wow, man, Julio knows how to write for the voice. Like this, I could sing this stuff forever, and I don't feel tired. And it's really, I also want to thank you for your attention to the text setting. I think you're right that that's something that, you know, occasionally in modern music is not as high of a priority. And it's tricky, you know, if the range is jumpy or the rhythm is very difficult, it can be hard to really get the sensibility of the poem across. And it was a big gift that was really woven into the essence of your songs. So,
and similarly, I should say with the piano writing, it doesn't there's always something that's challenging in most music for piano. And I think there's a difference between it demanding something new and it not being conceived with the instrument in mind. And I absolutely feel that your music is conceived with the sound of the piano in mind, you know.
That's accurate.
That's all. And it taught me new things about what can come out of a piano. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, composers don't use enough middle pedal, god damn it. They really should.
Yeah, so, you know.
So but back to your point, final thought here. We've all been through a really weird year, you know, for real, and it bears repeating. And this part of the sensibility of the poem is, and the song cycle is that it starts lost and it gets dark fast. But at the end of it, there's sunlight and warmth and release that comes with spring. And weirdly, we've hit on this exact moment when we are actually going to be out in the world again and reviving ourselves after this lost, dark, difficult time. And so I'm optimistic that these kinds of events and these kinds of songs will end up yielding, I think, new avenues for artists, that we're going to be able to perform live again, and that's going to be great, but that things like what we're doing right now are going to become an option. They're going to become a way to bring song and music and artistry to a whole new cadre and cohort of people who would never have seen it otherwise. So with that, your inspiration to do this was very, very much welcome. Thank you again.
Thank you, Julio. Thank you for the opportunity. We're so happy to have it. And we're so glad to be potentially meeting, you know, a new audience through you and through, you know, the people that you know who maybe are more connected to you through the science background and maybe are a little bit less familiar with the world of art song. It's a great, great joy to sort of welcome new people to the art song fold, as it were. And so anyone in our audience who's tuning into a concert like this, and maybe hasn't done so before or hasn't made a habit of it, we're so glad that you're here today. And we hope that you'll, you know, come back for more if you've enjoyed the songs and poems that we've presented with you or for you this evening.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good night. Bye-bye. It's